This episode is sponsored by Verizon. Are you ready for your next assignment? As a leading communications technology company, Verizon is always looking for experienced leaders to step forward and help us stay competitive in the global marketplace. More than 10,000 veterans contribute their skills across our entire business. We're proud to work alongside them each day and fortunate to benefit from their outstanding skills, discipline, and experience. To learn more about joining our team, check out verizon.com/military. Welcome back to Beyond the Uniform. I'm Justin Nassiri, and my goal is to help members of the military and their families thrive in their civilian career. Today's episode number 322, From Navy SEAL to Paralympic Gold Medalist with Dan Cnossen.
The first race off the bat ended up being the one where I had the number one next to my name on the results. I was trying to really focus on my mental plan, and I crossed the line on that. I knew it was a good race. You just know, if you've done the sport long enough, you just know. But I refused to look up at the Jumbotron screen that had the results. And I was told minutes after, maybe 10 minutes after, that it was somebody who was taking off my timing chip, and he said, "Yeah, an American won." And I was pretty sure that was me. It was just, but at that point I was so focused on, okay, now it's time to prepare for the next race. This race, it's over.
I don't really know what to say about today's interview. Dan is a classmate of mine from the Naval Academy. I didn't know him well while I was there, but I knew of him. This interview really makes me wish I would have had the chance to get to know him better while we were in school together. We recorded this interview, and there were some technical difficulties, and we got started a bit late, and I had another meeting right after it. It was actually a video conference that I have with my men's group each week. So I hung up with Dan and went straight into this men's group meeting. And we always start off these calls with a round-the-room check-in. Each of the 7 guys in my group takes 5 minutes to share what's going on in their life. And I just knew I would be picked to go first, and I was. And I was just coming from my conversation with Dan, and the whole weight of our conversation just hit me, and I got pretty emotional as I checked in with the guys. Dan made an enormous sacrifice in the service of our country. He paid a price for his choosing to keep our country safe, and he faced an incomprehensible recovery from that sacrifice, one in which he faced uncertainty, he faced loss and obstacles that it's really hard for me to get my head around. And he approached this with a moment-by-moment presence that really reveals the man he is. He came back from this loss to win the gold medal at the Paralympics. He made history in doing so. And through it all, he maintains himself with such humility, such candor, and such honesty. It really made me feel humbled and honored to have him on the show and to count him as a classmate. He has been hesitant to stand in the spotlight, to speak publicly about his experience. And if you, like me, are touched by his story as I was, I hope that you reach out to him and let him know. I think he is an incredible human being with an inspiring message, and I cannot wait to see what's ahead for him. Dan mentions towards the end of our conversation, he talks about I asked him about organizations he would recommend listeners support. Each of the ones that he mentions are listed in the show notes for this episode at beyondtheuniform.org. I hope that you'll check them out and consider supporting them. One last note, in his bio, I made a mistake. I said that he's currently a student at Harvard. He has graduated. So my mistake on that misspeaking there. So with that, let's dive in to my conversation with Dan. Well, joining me today, just outside of Boston in Natick, Massachusetts, my guest is Dan Cnossen. Dan, welcome to Beyond the Uniform.
Thanks, Justin. It's great to be here.
And I'm very grateful for Brian Ray connecting us. For listeners, Dan and I were classmates at the Naval Academy. I did not have as much interaction with Dan as I wish I would have, but I have seen his story from a distance. And I have to say, Dan, we have had incredible guests on the show, former CEO of Pepsi, NFL players, and honestly, I feel very, very honored to have you on. It's just, from what I've seen from your story, it's just, it is a real honor, and I am appreciative of your time on this.
Well, thanks for inviting me. It's great to be here, and I hope that your listeners can benefit in some way from our conversation today.
Awesome. Well, for listeners, let me give you a quick background on Dan. He is currently a graduate student at Harvard University working towards a Master's of Public Administration at the John F. Kennedy School of Government, as well as a Master of Theological Studies at the Divinity School. In 2018, the Winter Paralympics, Dan created history in his second Paralympic appearance after claiming a gold medal in the men's 7.5 kilometer sitting biathlon event. In doing so, he became the first American male and the second American ever to claim a gold medal in a biathlon event in either the Olympics or Paralympics. Dan grew up on a fifth-generation farm in Kansas. He attended the Naval Academy as part of the illustrious class of 2002, after which he served in the Navy as a SEAL. While serving as a platoon commander in SEAL Team 1 in Afghanistan in September 2009, Dan stepped on an IED and was wounded in the explosion. The accident caused Dan to lose both his legs just above the knee. As you will hear in this interview, in both his recovery and achievements since then, Dan continues to be an inspiration to those in and out of uniform. So, Dan, first off, anything you want to share with listeners about your bio that I didn't share right there?
Well, I guess I was going to say, I'm from Kansas, but you've already covered that. In the fifth generation farm is been running in my family since my grandfather's grandfather homesteaded out there in the 1870s and farmed the land. And so coming from that tradition is really special for me. I try to get back to Kansas as frequently as I can to go spend time there. And I think growing up there was a reason that I become so connected with the outdoors. I was always playing outside as a kid, roaming around outside. And I think that connection with the outdoors and nature really helped me get through my injury. And I'm still kind of trying to appreciate nature as much as I can on a daily basis.
That's wonderful. And so I have to kind of just own that I know you've shared your story so many times, so I feel a little self-conscious asking you. I'm sure you've kind of told this story so many times, and there's even like a little bit of fear of like not knowing how to talk about your experience. And so I just want to name that up front so it doesn't get in the way of our conversation. But I'm wondering what you would want listeners to know about what you remember from the events of September 2009.
Well, I will correct you a little bit. I've only recently started publicly talking about this. It's not from anything other than I just think a sense of trying to be quiet, in the sense of, I think the true ethos of the SEAL teams and just doing your job and not trying to advertise or self-promote. But after I won the gold medal, a lot more pressure came to do these kind of interviews and to publicly speak. And I started to reassess things. I stayed quiet for 9 years, didn't really ever give any public talks. Started to think, well, if I don't share my story at some point and in the right conditions, that I can help people, and that if I don't, that some of the lessons I've learned, and I've had years to think about, that those lessons would go when I go. So I've relatively recently started opening up more. And again, I've had time to process this. When you ask about what happened in September 2009, I was serving as a platoon commander at a West Coast-based SEAL team. In the SEAL community, it takes a few years to become a platoon leader. You typically are doing a preliminary tour in a platoon, but not as the officer in charge. And then you may be doing a couple other jobs here and there to get to the 6 or 7 or 8 year mark in your career where you're deemed ready to be the officer in charge of a platoon. And that's where I was. And I had some frustrating deployments prior to that. Not the kind of deployments that I wanted, the deployments that some of my friends and teammates were getting. Hearing about that, the mark of respect in the SEAL teams is combat. And I was a little just kind of frustrated and hoping that I would get a deployment like that. It might sound a little odd to some, but we wanted to put our skills to the test, and that meant going to Iraq or Afghanistan. And when I became a platoon leader in 2008, we went through an 18-month workup, really well trained, and we're selected to go on a high-risk deployment to Afghanistan in 2009. And so if any deployment thus far in my career was going to be a combat deployment, I would certainly choose the one where I was the officer in charge with the most on the line, the most responsibility. And I deployed in advance of my platoon to kind of get the lay of the land for the people that we would be relieving. How were they planning and conducting operations? What were the tactics they were using? To get that knowledge before the rest of my platoon showed up. I deployed just after Labor Day weekend in 2009, so a little over 10 years ago. And on the very first operation that I could have gone out on with the unit that we would be replacing, I chose to go out with them, and in the course of that operation, stepped on an IED. I was part of a side element that was tasked to secure a elevated piece of terrain over which an assault would occur after we had secured that piece of terrain. And in the course of that clearance, I stepped on an IED. And the number one thing that I have to say is that my teammates responded brilliantly, courageously, selflessly to save my life and extract me from the situation. I have them to thank, and I also have the pilots of the helicopter that raced back to get me. They're getting very low on fuel, from what I understand. And of course, I have to thank all the medical professionals along the way. And I'm happy to talk more in detail about that operation or the aftermath of the blast if you're interested. Otherwise, the number one thing I want to say is just that it was amazing for me to, as I look back on this, to see, because again, I was just a shadow person. And so a lot of the people that I was with on that side element up on this hilltop, I didn't even know them. Kind of briefly had met them, but we weren't part of the same platoon. And the fact that they put their lives on the line so heroically for me is really amazing. And that's the camaraderie that I now miss being a civilian, but it's hard to find that. I don't think any organization other than law enforcement and first responders would have this kind of camaraderie for sure. The SEAL teams had it, and I miss it the most about that time in my life when I had that. And
I appreciate that. I love at the start, even what you were saying about how it sounds like you're coming out of essentially a 9-year period of not talking about what happened and not, this sense of not wanting the attention in a wrong way to be on you. And it sounds like you're sharing your story. It really is an act of generosity. It's an act of giving back to help others who may go through something similar or who may gain inspiration from your story. And I think that's important for listeners to know. I know that in much different circumstances, most of the guests I have on the show share about how it's difficult for them to talk about their military experience and how it's difficult for them to share their story. And I think that you're a much more extreme example of the gift that can be to others, and that it's not a selfish act, but it is an act of giving back. And so I just want to name that. And I think that it's a unbelievable situation that you went through. And I'm grateful for the act of service that was behind that, and your act of leadership, and your act of wanting to take care of your team, and all of the things that went into this, into your making this sacrifice in service of our country. I was wondering, you went to Walter Reed, you had 2 years in rehab, and again, I struggle to even know how to ask about this, but it's like wanting to learn about how did you get through that? Like, that's when I put myself in those circumstances, I don't know how I would respond. And my intention is asking is that I'm sure that there are listeners who probably are not going through anything near like what you went through, and yet they're going through their own challenges. They're going through their own dark moments. And I'd love to learn what helped you get through that and what helped you persevere.
Well, I believe that humans, when our back is up against the wall, naturally will fight back.
Hmm.
It's just sometimes other things get in the way. I woke up in the hospital. I'd been in a medically induced coma for 8 days or so, and I learned that my legs had been amputated above the knees. In addition to that, I had a host of other internal problems: a colostomy bag, a bladder tube connected to a urine bag because my urethra had been severed, my bladder ruptured, fractured pelvis that was held in place by external fixator crossbars that wouldn't even let me get on my side or my stomach. My intestines weren't working. I was going through surgery 3 days a week, 7 to 10 hours of surgery, sometimes longer. Because of the intestines not working because of all the anesthesia from all that surgery time, I wasn't allowed to take anything, take any water, nothing into my stomach, no food. So I was being given calories through IV as well as hydrated through IV. And I had an NG tube that went down my throat into my stomach, having problems sleeping. And when I could fall asleep, I was having a really bad reaction to the painkillers that the docs had me on, manifested in nightmares. So this was a really low time for me. And I will say that thinking sometimes can be problematic in situations like this. My thoughts led towards the disconnection from my platoon. All of my identity was wrapped up in being a SEAL, and all of a sudden that's gone, at least to be a SEAL operationally, which is the only way I really wanted to at that time in my career. The legs to be an operational SEAL, they're gone. They're not coming back. What is my life going to look like? Am I going to be in a wheelchair the rest of my life? I don't know. All these thoughts are going through my head, and I kind of just fell back on what I learned in SEAL training, which is when things get really hard and really painful, you got to kind of block out those long-term thoughts of the future. And the best way to do that is through rigorous attention to the present moment. And when your mind wanders, you got to bring it back and focus on what you need to do right now to get through this moment. And that's what I was doing in the beginning of my hospital time. And then as things kind of widened out, my horizon for goal setting certainly played a huge part. I wanted to get out of the hospital. I wanted to walk and I wanted to run. I didn't have a goal structure beyond that. And I also couldn't tie timelines to those goals. But those two things, like having goals to help me kind of navigate and have direction, but also at the same time, those goals could be discouraging if I thought about them too much. So then shrinking time down to the moment and trying to do what I need to do today to get through today and make it to tomorrow. It's the duality of that, like kind of the long-term focus, but then the ability to shrink it down and get through the moment. That's what really helped me. And I think that is a potential formula for other people to apply in their own lives when they're going through really hard times.
Mm. It almost sounds like this tightrope walk where I can imagine it is like a moment to moment thing where at times you have like this goal that is right for you, this like micro goal that you can fixate on. And at times that might even seem too far. Like I just picture you. Is that fair to say that it's like constantly readjusting what's the goal that's far enough away to keep you motivated, but not so far away that it becomes overwhelming or intimidating? And I would imagine that probably changed one day to the next, and having to be aware of like what was the right point of focus for each moment.
You're absolutely correct. And honestly, I had to reappraise and reassess my goals. One of the things that was happening was people in the best of intentions would give me hope. There's leg amputees that are climbing Mount Everest and doing all these amazing things. And it turns out that that's true, but it might be someone who is amputated in a much less severe way. Let's just say a single amputation below the knee. Not to diminish that. It's a different situation. But I thought, well, if that can happen, I think I can get back into being an operational SEAL. I was totally delusional at this point, probably because of the painkillers. But once I got into the phase of physical therapy where I got the prosthetics, I realized how unwieldy and just awkward and heavy and cumbersome the knee prosthetics are, much less time having two of them. I clearly at that point had to face the reality. I am not going to be an operational SEAL. I can't run on these. I have different ones for running, but it's not like I can just change so easily between the walking ones and the running one. And so they have different functionality, but when you have a double leg amputation, you don't have a natural leg to kind of carry the weight. So it was a matter of like kind of facing what's realistic. What are my realistic goals? And then reassessing and reappraising. And that kind of falls into the midterm, I would say, timeline, like 6 months out. The long-term goals, they kind of, I think, naturally happened. They were along the lines of, I want to run, or eventually I want to go to graduate school. I didn't put timelines to these things because I didn't know how many setbacks I would have. And setbacks were unplanned and would happen sometimes out of the blue. I had an emergency surgery once that just came up out of nowhere. It turns out I had a portion of my intestine kinked around the site of the colostomy where it does come out of the skin. And I, for 3 days, was just getting backed up. And it got to the point where my sister insisted, and we were living out in DC at that point together, and I was just going through physical therapy. She insisted that I go in, and I had a midnight surgery out of the blue. It cut my stomach back open again. It was months to recover from that. Totally unexpected. Just kind of had to have that fluidity where I wasn't going to get too pinned on doing something by a certain day, not associating a goal with a timeline.
One of the things that came up when you were saying that is, what were the ways that people acted when you were in rehab that supported you? Like I can picture that, most of our listeners have not and will not go through an experience like yours, but there's a reasonable chance that they will have served with someone who they're friends with that will go through some sort of trauma. And I can imagine that some people respond like I'm doing, where you get put on a pedestal, which I imagine maybe gets to be old. And I imagine some people respond with these unhelpful examples of people who aren't in exactly the same situation or achieving things, and they're offering you false hope, like you said. I'm wondering, like, what advice do you have for people whose friends may be going through a similarly dark period, of how to support them and how to show up in a way that's actually going to nurture the person rather than cause more damage?
Well, that's a great question, and I can't answer for every situation. I think a good friend will know the person. Will know kind of how to approach their friend in their time of need. And for me, that was please don't inundate Dan with dozens of visitors all at once, everyone trying to do all this stuff. Like, I wanted to just spend time with my family and my immediate friends and do it kind of in a slow way and not be overwhelmed. I remember the first day or two that I was out of that unconscious medically induced coma, there were about 70 people in the waiting room, all trying to come into the ICU room, but they can only come in 2 at a time. And it was overwhelming. And then 2 months later, hardly getting any visitors. It would have been nice if that had kind of spread out. I think really, again, every situation is different. And I can only speak to myself, but I would reach out to people when I was looking for any sort of connection or support. And I think when it came time for me to do physical therapy, and that is the work, the hard work that it would take to get to walk, I would sometimes get frustrated because at Walter Reed, they do put you on a pedestal where, when I went through, and Walter Reed was separate from Bethesda Naval Hospital, the therapy room was lined by mirrors and glass, and the public could look through. It was almost like we were on display. Part of the putting on the pedestal, I think, helps reinforce the sense of the country's behind you, your sacrifice is worth it. But I wanted to get to work. I needed to do the therapy, and I only had from 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. with my physical therapist. And sometimes in the afternoons there, VIPs would come through to support the troops, and that's great, but it would sometimes be completely disruptive to the physical therapy. And I also think that it's a tendency for people, when someone has a major life-changing injury or setback, in the nature of what I had, to try to plan that person's life for them. And I would avoid that. And I also would avoid the kind of the false optimism that I alluded to earlier with saying, well, leg amputees are doing all these amazing things. Well, it did turn out that the details of the situation are different. And I think people kind of fall back on what they love. For me, it was, I loved being outside. I love training. I love being part of a team. I fell back on that. I didn't really need anyone to plan my life out for me. Now, I understand that many veterans are sometimes not sure of what's out there. And for me, the Paralympics was easy because they had a liaison right there at the hospital talk to me. And I thought, it just fits and it works for me. I'm gonna dedicate years to this. I didn't know I would dedicate years to it, but it has ended up being years. For everyone, that's not always an option to have some kind of clear route like I had. And I do consider myself very fortunate to have that. But falling back on what you love is a good start, I would say, for what you want to do.
I love that. And I was wondering about, like, I can imagine, you hear about the Paralympics and this becomes, I'm guessing it's like the next mission for you. It becomes something that, like, it seems like it just really resonated with you. At what point did you have clarity on the biathlon? When were you exposed to that? And when did you think, like, okay, that's the thing I'm going after?
It was getting to the end of my time at Walter Reed. I started at 2009 and I had done about 2 years there. In 2011, I was invited to a Paralympic sports camp. I want to back up and say I think it was in 2010 I was invited to the Paralympic sports camp. So maybe around a year and a half after I'd been injured, and it was the chance to go to San Diego where the camp was being held. And I thought that would be great. I had been stationed out there and I thought I could see some friends, and who knows what sport. I was kind of thinking running or something along those lines. I was approached by the biathlon and cross country ski coaches for the Paralympic team. And they asked if I would be interested in trying biathlon. And I thought that was actually running and swimming. It's not. It's cross country skiing with precision target shooting. So it combines the power and endurance of cross country skiing with precision target shooting. It comes from Nordic countries. It has a kind of hunting and military tradition behind it. I thought this would actually be awesome. They said you'd have to do this from the sitting position in the Paralympics because your legs are just too impaired to ski standing. So that's going to take a lot of training. You're going to have to retrain your upper body into being your engine, and you're only going to have two poles. Be seated above two cross-country skis, but your propulsion is only with two poles, your arms, your upper body. Like, that's going to take a lot of training. But at that point, like, training and seeing progress sounded really appealing to me. I was at a near ground zero mark and had been building up, but the thought that I could follow a training plan that crafted by professional coaches, that was really appealing to me, and that I would be part of a team. I'd fit in a structure where I had a role, that if I worked hard enough, I could make the U.S. team for a Paralympic Games, that I would work towards a goal, that I'd have teammates, that I'd have a whole support structure underneath and behind me. That just sounded awesome to me, and like such a good transition from the life that I had known before my injury, that I did dedicate years to it. In fact, I was so into it in the beginning. I moved to Colorado, as I mentioned. I was just training. I thought that I knew too much, that if I worked twice as hard, I would get there in half the time, or I'd get twice as fast. It doesn't really work like that with physical training. And I probably was doing a little too much at the high altitude, and I was also a new athlete, but certainly training was kind of my whole life for the first few years after my injury. And now I'm a little more mature about it. I rest a lot more, and I'm finding that my results are a bit better as well. So there's something to be said, I think, for committing yourself to something, but committing yourself to the process, and recognizing there's other experts out there that have more information. You should listen to them. And that's a process of recognizing that my ego can do me no good sometimes in many cases.
I just love that, paired with earlier you were talking about the moment to moment experience and kind of checking in each moment around goals and motivation. And then it almost seems like this is another aspect of that, of trusting the process and checking in, I'm guessing, like on a daily basis too, of like what your body is needing, what your training is needing. And I can imagine the difficulty of those pausing moments, those moments where it might even be easier to be like, I'm going to go out and crush it and train. And your deeper intuition is like, actually, I need to rest. I need to trust the coach's guidance. And yeah, I think there's a power in that sense of like feeling into the moment and what's right there, rather than just, I have to always break through the next wall.
Yes. And it's counterintuitive, but you can actually make more progress by sometimes doing nothing today.
Mm-hmm.
And it really took me going to graduate school in 2015 for me to be forced to rest. And then I was thinking, I'm going to be lucky if I can even train for an hour and a half to 2 hours before class and forget about that second workout. Can I even train once today? But with proper time management skills we learned at the Naval Academy, I was able to kind of set a zone in the morning. It required me going to bed at an early hour at night, not staying up too late studying, wake up early and train, and proper time management. I was able to do it. And I was then made aware of how important it really is to rest. This sounds obvious, but I thought if you can do more work training wise and still recover, you will be more prepared. And that is true, but I was probably doing too much work and not recovering quite well enough. And graduate school forced me to rest. And I looked at the training as a wonderful break from being in class or having to study. This was my 2-hour block to be outside on the Charles River, out in Concord, Massachusetts, where I hand cycle or in the swimming pool or on the track or whatever I was doing, in the winter skiing. And then when I was in class, it would be an amazing opportunity to recover, forced recovery. I would hydrate, wash my hands after if people were sick and coughing in the class. And so they had a nice balance there. One side reinforcing the other. School reinforcing the importance of recovery, and then training kind of providing a wonderful break from class. And I could also think about papers or assignments and come back from training with a different perspective than when I had begun that session. It gave me ammunition to think about when I was going through the training. So it was wonderful.
Where did that come from? Like, at what point did you know, I want to go simultaneously to the School of Government as well as the School of Theology? What was driving that?
Well, I will correct. I have graduated from both the Kennedy School and the Divinity School, and I started in 2015 at Harvard Kennedy School of Government in the mid-career program. And it was a 1-year program, and I was using my GI Bill. First semester in, I realized I love being back in school. I was 35 years old and really enjoying just being back in school. It made me feel young. It was also neat to be around people that had different perspectives, came from different countries or different backgrounds, different job experiences. And I didn't want it to end after just one more semester after that. The 1-year program seemed so short. So I was kind of looking around for other programs. I stumbled upon some students from the Divinity School at Harvard, and I actually had a class with a few of them, and the way they thought really intrigued me. And then I asked more about the school, and said, it's a multi-religious school where you are in class with people from all sorts of different world traditions and different views. You can specialize in ethics or philosophy of religion, theology. You could take classes on Buddhism or Hinduism, Judaism, all these kind of things, not to mention cross-registering within the Harvard system. And I could take more classes at the Kennedy School if I wanted to. All this sounded really appealing to me. So I applied. I was fortunate enough to get in and classed up there in 2016 and graduated in 2018. So they were two separate programs, all paid for through the GI Bill. It was an amazing experience for me, and I do miss being in school.
I'm just trying to be conscious of our time here. There's so many so many ways to go, but maybe take us to the Olympics 2018, Paralympics 2018. And I was watching a video. I'll put this in the show notes for listeners, but it just sounded like you were in a good spot going into the Paralympics. Like you seemed grounded, and it seemed like you were in the zone. Could you take us back about like leading up to that, what it was like to compete, what the actual competition was like? And then I'm just dying to know what it was like standing on that podium, the top of the podium, having a gold representing your country.
Well, thanks for doing the research. I had trained for the 2014 games and made the U.S. team, and had, I think, a decent performance there. The difference was in the interim, so for the years between 2014 and 2018, the major difference was going to graduate school. Also, I moved to sea level, and I had some changes in the way that I trained. The number one change, though, was my mindset. Instead of thinking about, I want to win or I want to get a medal, it was, I want to enjoy training as much as possible and focus on the process. And when I get to the race, I just want to see how hard I can push myself and see what I can do. It was just about a self time trial. Try to ignore the announcer as best you can. If some words come in my brain, let them come out the other ear, or side of, in one ear, not the other. Don't look at the Jumbotron. Try to ignore the other athletes. Our races are structured as time trials. And so focusing just on what I could do, this is just a test of what I can do. And at the end, I cross the line, it's done, that race is over. It has no bearing on the next race. Now it's time to start recovering. I had taken some classes on Buddhism at the Divinity School, and they really, really gelled with the athlete in me, like recognizing that all life is suffering, and that there are ways to try to combat that, like breaking down the ego, focusing on meditation. Breath is very important in biathlon. I started doing some meditation to try to focus on my breath, developing strategies for refocusing my attention only on the moment, what needs to be done right now, not thinking far ahead. That is the essence of meditation. And I started to apply it. And I've never been in a World Cup type experience in previous competitions as in line mentally as I was at the Paralympics. I was fortunate that it lined up then, because it is kind of hard to time that over a 4-year cycle, that kind of peak mental and physical performance. But it was there, and it just really was awesome to feel it. It also is a credit to our team and the wax technicians and all the testing that they did. And we just had awesome fast skis. The course played to my advantages as a hill climber. But I think the number one difference for me was just my mindset, and that I wasn't focused on medals. I was just telling myself every day, just do what you can do it to the best, and be in the moment. And in the moment might mean I'm on an uphill right now. I'm not thinking about having to shoot 3 minutes from now. I'm thinking about this uphill. And when it's time to shoot, I'm not thinking about skiing, or I'm not thinking about missing a shot. I'm focused on the procedure. What do I need to do? Side alignment. What's the wind doing? Trigger squeeze, breath, all of this. So it's that rigorous kind of attention to detail and being in the moment that I think is the difference. And it's very difficult. Like, the mind wants to wander, but bringing it back to the purpose is really what I was trying to do, to the present moment.
I just want to chime in. I love that. And for listeners, I'll add, we've done a couple shows on meditation, mindfulness. There's the Veterans Yoga Project. Huge advocate. I didn't ask about that during the rehab, but that's where my mind was going, was like this thought of just bringing yourself back to the present moment. And what I really appreciate about your story is that the little I know about the biathlon, it's it's what I envision is like the most moment to moment sport where you're racing and then slowing your heart down and shooting. It's just like, it seems like it is stringing together these moments. And I'm sure every competitive sport has elements of that, but I love that you found the sport that seems to really make use of that the most. It's almost like it from an outsider's perspective, it's like everything was lining you up to teach you to be present in the moment, and painful lessons and craziness there. But I don't know, there's just something that's really beautiful about that, and how it's this consistent, and it's even wild for me to think of you training while at school and then achieving something this great and having this underlying mindset of like not fixating on the outcome, not fixating on the other competitors or the medal, but just doing your personal best in that moment. And I think that makes it even more powerful that your personal best happened to also be the best in the world, but that wasn't the framework you were using while achieving it.
I was very focused on that. In the first race, I mean, the first race off the bat ended up being the one where I had the number one next to my name on the results. I was trying to really focus on my mental plan, and I crossed the line on that. I knew it was a good race. You just know, if you've done the sport long enough, you just know. But I refused to look up at the Jumbotron screen that had the results. And I was told minutes after, maybe 10 minutes after, that it was somebody who was taking off my timing shift, and he said, "Yeah, an American won." And I was pretty sure that was me. It wasn't. It was just, but at that point I was so focused on, okay, now it's time to prepare for the next race. This race, it's over. And so it was amazing afterwards, and in the medal ceremony and seeing the flag go up, it was, but I was so focused on the next one that I didn't really soak it all in until the whole games was over. And then I tried to then like kind of and it was very very new for me at that point. So at that, I was getting some interview requests and all this stuff, and I was really trying to focus on that stuff. Those externalities, they don't matter. All that matters is just what you can do on the race course. None of that matters. I was not looking at my phone very often. I don't do social media. I didn't want to see anything that would potentially interfere with my mindset. And that's tough sometimes. There's a lot of distractions out there, but just focusing on what you really need to do is tough, but it's so useful in times of performance or times of adversity.
I love that. What is at this moment, like, what is the next goal or micro goal? Like, what's ahead for you?
Well, what's that? Good. Thanks for the question. I'm still part of the U.S. ski team and going season to season. I'm not committing to years from now, but I'm excited to do this next season. If I feel like, if I think about doing the hard kind of workouts that you need to do to get ready for the ski season, and I'm feeling excited about it, then that's a good sign. And I am. So I'm going to keep doing this as long as I'm passionate about it, and as long as they'll keep taking me to races. And that's kind of a function of performance. But I'm also getting into a bit more public speaking, and I'm working with a friend's company. They're called O2X. It was started by some SEAL friends of mine, and we do workshops with firefighters and other first responders, teaching them skills that I wish I knew as a new SEAL, the importance of prehab, which is kind of what you do before a workout, how to train properly, and how to do proper post-training stretching and mobility, how to conduct proper injury prevention, the importance of sleep and hydration, nutrition, proper footwear, how to come off structures and through structures without injuring yourself. I teach a class on goal setting, falls under the resilience category, and it's really, really great to be part of an organization that's doing this kind of quality work to help give our first responders the mental and physical skills they need to perform better and last longer in their jobs. And I'm also volunteering with a nonprofit called Classroom Champions, and the model there is to take Olympic and Paralympic athletes and provide lesson plans for kids in classrooms, and taking some of the skills we've learned as athletes, skills like how to set goals, how to persevere through tough times, the importance of teamwork and community. All these broad topics are put into about a 5 to 7 minute lesson plan each month for the kids. So there's a couple of things that make me feel like I'm giving back a little more than just being a selfish athlete getting my workouts in and then, recovering the rest of the day.
And for listeners, in the show notes at beyondtheuniform.org, I'll have a link to O2X and Classroom Champions. But beyond that, I'm just wondering, I think many listeners are probably feeling like I do, where I really appreciate your authenticity and the transparency of what this journey has been like. And I think you've got just a very humble being around everything that you've been through and are going through, and I'm sure will go on to do. For those of us who want to support you, we want to help you in your journey, whatever support looks like. I know you're not on social media, but is there some spot where they can be aware of when you're speaking, or is there a cause they could give to? Or if I were to just pass the mic to you right now and say, look, I and many people are cheering you on and want to support you, how can we best do that?
Well, I think it's worthwhile to look at who has supported me and allowed me to kind of get to where I've gotten. And I would say right off the bat that the Semper Fi Fund, Injured Marine Semper Fi Fund from the Marine Corps has really been wonderful. They were there from day one, and I'm not a Marine, but they recognize that other service members work with Marines, which I have in the past, and they've been great. An organization called One More Wave has gotten me into surfing, and I think that there's a lot of benefit for these organizations. There's so many to count. I've done Wounded Warrior Project soldier rides. I've gone hunting with Wounded Warrior Outdoors, and there's a lot of nonprofits that are doing wonderful work for veterans, and it's worth taking the time to kind of see what's out there and considering donating to some of these organizations for the good work that they do, for sure.
Well, I always like to keep the last, and for listeners, I'll add show notes, links to all of those. I always like to keep the last question open-ended. We covered a lot. I'm sure there's things we didn't talk about that you might want to talk about. And so I just wanted to make a few minutes of space at the end for either anything we didn't talk about you want to make sure listeners know, or just any final words of wisdom that you'd like to leave with listeners.
Well, specifically for veterans who may be listening, I would say that using the GI Bill or vocational rehabilitation, if you have any level of disability, is so worthwhile. For me, the GI Bill is such a good deal, and I was just checking the other day to see how many months I have left of it. I have 13 months left, and I feel like I need to use it. It's tuition is so expensive, and the fact that because of our service, we can tap into this amazing program through the VA that pays tuition. I mean, that's just amazing. And so I think for me, it was important to get into school after I got out of the military, just to kind of see what's out there and see what I would be intrigued by. And although I'm still doing the Paralympic athlete route, because of school, I have some other intellectual pursuits that I think are worthwhile and that will help me later on when I do retire from being an athlete. And so whether it's school or retraining through the vocational rehabilitation program, I think it's really important to take advantage of these services. And so a lot of people may not know or think that they qualify, but in many cases you probably do, and it's worth looking into it.
Awesome, Dan. Well, we will be cheering you on at your future athletic performances and your speaking and your giving back, and excited to see the fruition of these academic pursuits. But yeah, I really appreciate your sharing your story with us today. I know a lot of people are going to be encouraged by it, and appreciate all you're doing to continue to support the military community.
Thanks, Justin. This is great. It's an honor to be on your podcast, and I'm happy to help you and in any other future work that we could do together. And thanks for what you're doing as well.
Surface.
Thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Quick couple admin points. We release brand new episodes every single Monday and Thursday. Those are usually recorded about a month or so before they go live. Every Monday and Thursday, we have an interview, usually almost always with a military veteran about their civilian career. More and more, we're starting to add in experts who may not be veterans, but may have some expertise that will help the military veteran community. Saturdays, I typically post more of a behind the scenes episode, which is a free form format. I try to use what I'm calling a mullet format. And by that, I mean business up front, party in the back, talking through admin points, professional topics related to the podcast. It might be a conversation I had that week. It might have been an interview I had that week, but just trying to share things that are top of mind that may help you in more of a free form, straight from the heart format. And then the party in the back is the personal side of things, just kind of more free flowing thoughts on life, on improving oneself, just kind of whatever's going on in life, and trying to be authentic and honest about those things as well. Special thanks. We have an all volunteer army of people behind Beyond the Uniform making this possible. We do this on our lunch breaks, on our evenings, on our weekends, because we love the military community. We want to give back. We want to make a difference. We want that as part of the purpose in our life that we valued in the military. So special thanks to Steve Bain. Steve does pretty much everything. He helps secure guests. He does our newsletter. He keeps the reels rolling and keeps me sane. Kathleen Dillon, the first person to join our team. She writes text transcripts of every single episode. It's wild. She keeps up with 2 of these a week despite a demanding career and education right now. But those transcripts help us get more SEO value, helps her audience more. Andrew Woolridge is our data guru. He helps us understand the numbers, which is the easiest way for us to figure out how we can better support you, and adds kind of the data oversight for that. Rick Healy does all of our social media. He is gaining more and more of an audience for us by getting our videos, getting our podcasts out on social channels. The best way to stay in contact with us is if you go to beyondtheuniform.org, there is a newsletter. You'll have a little pop-up that comes up. You can put your email in. We email twice per month. We try to be respectful, but it is a great way to get appraised of upcoming events, upcoming interviews, promos where companies are giving discounts to Beyond the Uniform listeners, and more. This does cost money to put on. We are committed to not charging veterans directly, and the way that we kind of offset costs is through corporate sponsors. So if you know of a company that would like to get in front of a military audience and their families, that's one way that we can both add value to our members, but also offset the costs of Beyond the Uniform and give us a little bit of budget to start expanding what we're doing. So that's the best way you can help us. If that's not something that you can do, a positive review on iTunes is greatly appreciated. Have a wonderful week. We will be back Monday, Thursday, and Saturday with more interviews. And keep up the listening. Take care.